Hi, I'm Terry Elton, and I want to talk to you today a little bit about a faithful participatory process for discernment and decision making. If you have your access to your PowerPoint slides, I encourage you to get them at this point. One of the things I want to highlight as we begin is what's the reality of which we're making decisions and discerning today, and then what does that mean for us? And so what are the kind of necessary tools and resources that we are going to want to consider as we do this for ourselves as Christian public leaders, but also within the communities that we're serving? 4 realities that I want to highlight. First is there are multiple worldviews all taking place at the same time. There used to be, in some places, a dominant worldview. In some places, there still is. But as we think both domestically here in the United States as well as globally, there are multiple worldviews that sometimes complement each other, sometimes are in tension, sometimes just live alongside each other. And this goes with the second one, which is that there are multiple sources of authority. So, for example, when there used to be a Christian worldview here in the United States, there was this understanding that the Bible had authority and that religious values and religious practices were really valued significantly. And those two things work together to kind of center communities. That no longer is the case in most of the places of which we live, or at least there's significant minority ones in conversation with that. And so as we make decisions and discern, we need to take that into account. That gets to the third one, which is that there are multiple realities living alongside each other. There are things happening globally. There are things happening in our country. There are things happening in our city. There's things changing within our families. There's things changing within our schools. There's things changing within our religious landscape. Those multiple realities all moving at the same time mean it's hard to discern what is due to one factor and what is due to another. And then finally, many of us have been kind of groomed with an enlightenment progress mentality to the point where human agency and the idea that if we just work together, we'll get to a place of accomplishing what we need to. I think we're very aware these days of our human limitations and even the fact of our sinfulness individually, but also in our systems. So that reality has some things that we need to consider as we think about decision making and discernment. First of all, that any kind of discernment or decision making needs to be participatory and communal. It used to be that authorities or people that were in charge could make decisions on our behalf, and now more and more people want to be a part of that. I often tell congregations that the process is as important, if not more, than the actual decision. What happens at the end is important, but you could have the quote right answer, and if you haven't brought people along, you're still going to stumble and have some problems. And that brings us to the second point. Engaging in multiple and diverse perspectives in a conversation allows for different kinds of interpretations, not to be shut out, but actually to come alongside to say, what happens when we put these together? Is there something new that emerges? Is there some way that one helps us think about the other differently? That goes to a third one that again says this is a complex time. And so maybe we put some voices together and we find out, oh, those aren't the right voices, and we think about some others. But how do we recognize the complexity of our lives today? And then finally, how do we provide space both for human agency, or those of us coming together to do our best work together, but also recognizing our limitations and need for divine agency with regard to that? So I'm now bringing to the second piece. That brings us to both what is grounded discernment in this new world and what does a participatory decision-making process have in mind. So the first question around grounded discernment, or the issue, is really around the question, what is God doing? How do we, as we communally do this, keep God in the center, right? But also allow room for flexibility and discovery and discernment that might even surprise us, something that we hadn't thought of happened, okay? How do we draw on the wisdom of others and the learnings from other disciplines and the people around us in today's world, but also from other generations and across time, especially as we think about religious traditions or in other fields that there's a tradition that's long and rich and thousands of years old? And finally, how do we take the large universal kind of understandings and put them in conversation with the particulars of any particular context or time or family or just situation that we're facing? Now you add that to what's a participatory decision-making process need that would be valuable. First of all, how does it stay open? How do you invite different voices in, maybe not the whole time, but along the journey, and have a focused conversation that continues to move forward? Open doesn't mean just because you weren't there in the first meeting, doesn't mean that you can't be a part of it moving forward, but it does mean we're not going to continually go back to the last meeting at every time because people weren't there. Open, focused, and moving. How do we also invite and really depend on communal engagement? So my congregation is going through a discernment and decision process around building space as they look to the future. And so along the way, there's been times to open it, have people there, get feedback, talk with the architects, draw up some ideas, sketch some things, put them in front of people, get feedback, come back, and it's this back and forth. At different points, they've had, for example, questions about the children, youth, and family space, and if people from children, youth, and family weren't at those meetings or whatever, they go seek it out and they draw in that feedback. So what does it mean to have communal engagement as a part of that process? And how do we move from the discernment thing, which is what should we be doing, what is the faithful response, to now moving that into action? So maybe from discernment you say, we really value and believe we need to become more diverse, but what are the steps you need to take as a community to actually move that idea or that ideal into lived reality that says, let's try some things, does this work, let's adapt, keep moving that forward. And then finally, how do you do the whole thing with a posture of learning and growing? So this second column, this decision making, is really about how shall we proceed. If this is what God's doing and this is where we feel our response is, then how shall we proceed to move it forward? Now in that, there's this slide that says, here's the discernment piece and here's the process piece. This discernment is Osmer's hermeneutical circle that we're introducing to you in this course and throughout all these CPL courses. There's an article that's posted in my Lutheranet and on your e-reserves. There's also a video by Andy Root and Tim Colfett talking about this. And I think they do a really nice job saying what is, why is it, what ought to be happening, and how should we respond, in saying that this is an ongoing thing that we can enter at any point, and the questions continue to build and clarify with each other. So I encourage you to look that and to practice that in your precept papers and in your reflections. That's really about discernment and multiple voices and recognizing complexity. But the last part is something that comes from Craig Van Gelder's article, essay for this time that you might want to look at more deeply. And it's about a process of decision making. Now, if you go to this piece, this is Craig Van Gelder's piece of putting discernment and decision-making together. His hermeneutic for thinking about what is happening is here. How is it theoretically framed, or theologically framed, theoretically informed, communally discerned strategic action? That's his piece. If you want, you can say, here's what we're doing. We're putting Osmer in that space. But then we're asking for the decision process is these 5 A's that live around it. So I just want to say a word about that as we wrap up here. So what does attending mean? Attending is, so if, let's say we're going to look at what's happening in children, youth, and family, let's particularly think about Sunday school. So Sunday school numbers are down. So attending to that may mean there are less families in our community. And so you look at that, you check out some questions, you make some assertions, you test them with some people, and then you get agreement or disagreement, and you ask some families and you're like, no, it's not about that. There's plenty of people in my neighborhood, but that time doesn't work because of this YZ. What if we tried, rather than Sunday morning, Wednesday evening? So then you decide to act. You decide to move the children, youth, and family to Wednesday evening. Then you assess, how did it go? Is it changing what we had thought? Is there something else going on? And then you go to attending again, and you go to asserting. So you continually go through that, and that is a process of decision making. It actually is trying things out and testing them back. So again, if you're looking at what we're going to be doing is putting Osmer in the middle here for our discernment that you're going to practice. But we want to give you this outer ring of decision making as you think about how you're engaging your congregations. And so as you think about how Osmer helps you, what is happening, why is it happening, what does it mean, and how shall we respond? That's really about how do we put experience, analysis, theological reflection, and our response all into conversation. I think that's a really nice piece that lives in both of these two circles. I hope this video has helped introduce you to some concepts, see how they work together, and help you think more deeply about not only who you are as a leader, but how you lead within the communities that you lead. Thank you.